Everyone has a client horror story or two, but what's more important is what we can learn from them. So how can you better communicate with your clients and avoid these, frankly, scary mistakes? Stay tuned to find out. Hey, it's Hayley from Motion Hatch here. In this video, we're going to share with you some spooky client horror stories and what the motion designers who told them learned about communication with their clients so you can avoid the same mistakes in the future. Make sure you stick around to the end because I want to share with you my scary client horror story. And do let us know in the comments if you have a client horror story or what you've learned from them about dealing with your clients. Remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell to get weekly videos around the business side of motion design, helping you to grow your motion design career and to build a successful business.
Yeah, there was one instance where, keep in mind, I was a college student, so I was absolutely broke. This person came to me and they said that they needed, some animation for a music video. And at the time I was trying to learn cell animation and I saw the opportunity to try it. So I was like, yeah, okay. We agreed upon $300 for the entire project, which is so embarrassing to say now. And I did the project. The client was happy. And at the end of it, the client refused to pay what we had agreed upon. And when I pressed them for it, they were like, no, we agreed upon up to $300. So I think we'll give you $100. And I was like, are you not happy with what I've given you? Like, what would you like me to do? And they were like, no, we're happy with it. We just can't afford it. I think there's a lot to take away from that story, but first and foremost, it's that you should always have everything in writing, like not necessarily that when you're emailing a studio, you should be like, this is what you're paying me in the end, but more towards this is my day rate, this is my current day rate, and like have the year in there, as well as sometimes like what your hours a day are. So for example, when I'm emailing someone now, I make sure to say, this is my rate per 8-hour day in 2021 or 2022, what have you.
So I was starting a job. This was the first job with a new client, and I talked with them about kind of my method of how I work, from like starting out kind of rough, just getting them a first pass, if you will, and it's rough and stuff. And then we continue to move on and flesh stuff out, and the story goes on. And so I sent them the first rough cut, and they're like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "Well, this is like, we talked about the rough pass," and they're like, "Have you done this before?" I was like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Do you actually know how to do motion graphics?" I'm like, "Are you seriously?" Like, and they just kept digging in about how horrible I was and how horrible this piece was and how embarrassed they were, and they couldn't show it to the client. I'm just like, but we like talked. And so like I felt so defeated. I didn't know what to say. Like, I don't know how to, like, I thought we talked about it and they just didn't understand. They thought rough cut meant like it looks like almost a finished piece. And so I was just there. I'm like, got off the phone and I just like, I've been doing this for almost 15 years and I felt like crying. I was like, I'm a horrible person. Why am I doing this? So after he told me he hated it and all that, we got off the phone and I wrote up an email and I was just like, I think there's a miscommunication. My idea of a rough cut is this and here's yours. And he's like, yeah, I was a little harsh. But, we need something that is more than that in order for us to show this client. And, it was a bit tough because they had meetings too. And so I needed to get something better looking out quickly. So it was rough and I like still felt horrible. Like I'm the worst motion designer ever. And like, I'm creating this and I'm like, I'm just the worst. This is horrible. This is the worst. And the whole time I'm creating this and slogging, it was a long night. And I got out the next day and they were super appreciative. It was, but the relationship there will always be like, this person thinks I'm an amateur and that I had just started and I was a liar. So the communication, I just try and get it out there and be as descriptive as possible and say, like, a rough cut means rough. Like, we're not talking like almost done. We're saying like stuff is gonna look like busted. So
So my client horror story is actually my first ever paid animation project back in 2017 while I was still in my second year of university. So a friend of mine from art school knew somebody who was making a self-funded documentary feature film, and she wanted some animation in it. She didn't have any money though. I think she originally offered me like $500 for the first clip. But that didn't really matter to me because I was just like so eager to get any client work under my belt. And so we didn't really have a lot of questions, I guess, about like tech specs or even like where it was going to end up. I was really fixated on like how I was going to actually create this animation because I hadn't really done a lot of animating at that point. And the brief was like Disney princess films. So, you know, I was pretty fixated on just like trying to get something that resembled any of that aesthetic. Anyway, she ended up using that clip and some other footage to put together a sizzle reel and ended up getting funding. So she was able to pay me, you know, a couple of grand to make a few other films for her within this like suite of films for the documentary. So in the end, there was about 4 to 5 minutes of animation I did for her over like the course of my university. My first year out of uni, it ended up premiering at the Sydney Film Festival. And this was really exciting. It was my first year out of school and I technically had a credit as an animator on a feature film. You know, it was an indie feature film, but I still had a credit. So I flew out to Sydney from Melbourne. I got all dressed up. I brought a friend with me to the premiere. There was even a logo wall, like the Sydney Film Festival logo wall where we were going to do a photo shoot. However, the film starts. It was great. It was really enjoyable to watch. But my parts, it was like the timeline in After Effects was buffering. And that's bad enough watching on a computer screen, but on like a cinema screen, it was painful. And I like sunk into my chair and felt really embarrassed. I felt like a fraud. I felt like, you know, mega imposter syndrome. And my friend thought that I was being dramatic because she said that it looked great. And afterwards, though, I was like so embarrassed that I didn't even go to the cast and crew photo at the logo wall because I was ashamed. And then I just decided that I wasn't going to bring it up unless somebody else brought it up. You know, hopefully they hadn't noticed. However, I had developed a pretty good relationship with the director and we had a pretty honest, you know, open communication. So she called me the next day and was like, did you notice that some things were a bit off? Timing wise, it all made sense. It was like frames were being dropped, like things were just off. Anyway, we ended up working out, you know, talking to the editor and a few other people who had worked on it. We ended up working out that my footage was in a different frame rate to what the footage needed to be in. So there was just a miscommunication around frame rates. And I guess I didn't even expect that a frame rate could make such a dramatic difference when it's put into the wrong frame rate. Like it was very noticeable. So I ended up having to like dig up to find old hard drives because I did not have a very good filing system at that point in time. Find this old stuff I'd worked on like 2 years earlier and re-export it, tidy up a few things. It was all good. So in the end, it was resolved. And the main thing that I learned is that, have a discovery period. Ask your clients lots of questions about aspect ratios and outputs and where it's going to be played, where it's going to be published, what platforms, like where does it belong. Really understand what you're actually making, not just visually, but technically.
So I had this client, pretty much my first animated video, where I said, I'm going to work on some kind of script and I'll be coming back to him. And after a week, he called me and he said, where's the video? I'm waiting for the video. And I told him, yeah, I'm still working on the script. It's going to take some time. And then he was like, oh, yeah, I see. You have to wait for the perfect moon phase and smoke some weed. You designers have to wait for that to happen. Then, yeah, I told him, yeah, this is not going to happen. This is not a relationship that I can have with you. And I quit the job. And now I know I have to really educate my clients and tell them how the process is, how long each step is going to take, so there is no miscommunication and no strange behavior.
One of them was like that client that approached us to do like a cool music video. So we kind of like gave them like a contract. We were like really proud of like, okay, we covered the 2 rounds of amends, everything. So it's kind of like collected there. And yeah, we negotiate a little bit of like the flexibility with creative output. And then we gave them a proposal really nicely, well designed. They like it. Everything was like, oh my God, this is like an amazing project. They didn't have too much budget, but we didn't care because we really wanted to do the project. What happened is like suddenly when we deliver everything and they seem like quite okay with just like few amends and we deliver completely, they came back, they say that they wanted to change everything. The colors, the design, so everything, and was like, I'm so sorry, but this is not gonna happen. So good that we got paid the 50% in advance, because then they disappear.
So this story actually happened to a partner of mine, but I had to deal with significant parts of it. So I think that's fair. We were doing a large project with a regular sizable corporate client. There were some significant revisions that needed to get done because the actual decision makers wouldn't look at the thing until it was basically finished and then change their mind on some of it, essentially. And he was basically told, like, just make the changes. I think he kind of said, like, that's going to be expensive and it's fine, just do it. He, makes the changes involving like getting we hired a freelancer to help get some of this stuff done, like over the Christmas break and stuff, which obviously wasn't cheap. The superiors there at the client were unhappy when the project was suddenly, $10,000 over budget because of this. So we went back and forth with them a bit, and eventually went and met with them in person and kind of hashed it out and, figured out a way that we could kind of both eat part of it, which wasn't ideal, but, was the best solution in there. It was a great underscoring of the fact that just sending one email probably could have headed off that entire thing. Because if you get something like that verbally, there's no way to confirm any of it, and there's no real accountability, and so it kind of becomes a thing where we weren't trying to throw anyone under the bus, but it was like, that's what we were told. We don't really know who has the authority to do this, because some aspects of the project had gotten kind of chaotic from the client's side at that point. But just sending one email to, all the people that were involved, like, hey, just wanted to confirm, so-and-so and I had this conversation tonight and this is what we're doing going forward. Boom. Now that's out there, and at least it gives someone a chance to put the brakes on it. So, if anything like that ever happens to you, just send the one email, and it might save everyone a lot of hassle and trouble.
So here's my client horror story. So quite a few years ago, when I was first working as a freelancer, I had a project where I was working remotely. The client said they had 4 days in the budget. So I started working on the project. We'd actually gone over the 4 days, but the client had continued to send me tweaks and amends to the project. I assumed this meant that they wanted me to continue and they were going to pay for my extra time. Little did I know that the client only had 4 days in the budget and they really couldn't move on that. So after I'd completed an extra 2 days to help them and do these tweaks and amends for them, I got back to them and gave them my invoice that had 6 days on it. And they said, "I'm sorry, but we can really only afford 4 days. We didn't realize you were working on it." So even though they were emailing me the tweaks, they didn't realize that they'd gone over budget. So this is a really, really big lesson in over communicating to your client, especially if you're working remotely, because they don't necessarily know how much time you're spending on it and what you're doing with that project. So I would always say, if you're going over budget, let them know as soon as possible, ideally before you've gone over budget. So maybe you can tweak the scope of that project for them, and then that means that they have time to do amends and things like that. Usually over communicating and letting your clients know as soon as possible when something's going out of scope or over budget is the best way. In the end, on that project, I only got paid for extra 1 day that I worked instead of the 2 days that I actually worked. So really, really big lesson here. Always make sure you over communicate to your client. It's really just as easy as sending them an email. And the sooner you can tell them that you think you're going to go out of scope or that it's going to go over budget, whether that's their fault or your fault, the better, really. Over communicate is always the best way. I hope you enjoyed these spooky client horror stories, and I hope you learned some lessons about communicating with your clients. Maybe now you're looking for some better clients because you've heard some of these scary stories. Well, we've got a free course for you to help you get your next or first motion design client in just 5 days. Check out the link in the description below, and I'll see you next time.